OS 10 Basic Orientation. In this nugget, we're going to get to kind of learn our way around the OS 10 operating system. Find out where most of the basic things are and find out some of the ways that we can interact with it to run applications and work with files and so forth. We'll start by talking about the desktop, and we'll move on to Finder, which is sort of analogous to Windows Explorer application and is used to manage files and folders on your computer. We'll talk about the dock, which is kind of like the Windows taskbar. We'll look at the global OS 10 menu bar and talk about three special features that are available across all Mac applications: Spaces, Expose, and the dashboard. Let's get started and find out where everything is in OS 10. So let's start with a little basic orientation. You're looking at a Mac desktop. This one is running OS 10.5, which is codenamed Leopard, but any Mac running the 10.x series of the operating system will look substantially similar. So you've got really four major elements when you're looking at a blank screen like this. The first element is the desktop. That's the big background area. And of course, you can set it to different colors or put bitmaps back there for wallpaper and so forth. And in fact, the easiest way to do that is just to right-click and select Change Desktop Background. You can also create new folders, arrange icons on the desktop by various ways, and so forth. Now, something that's kind of important is that thing I just said, right-click. Now, Macs are traditionally have come with mice that only have one mouse button. It acts as the left mouse button, unlike in Windows, where it's more common to have a two-button or even three-button mouse. So if you do have a single-button mouse and you want to right-click, how do you do it? Now, it's pretty easy. You just hold down the Control key and left-click. That's the same as a right-click. You can get two-button mice for Macs, though. In fact, if you have one laying around that you've used with Windows that's a USB mouse, plug it in. It'll work fine. You may have to reconfigure your Mac so that it will use the second mouse button, and we'll talk about how to do that in nugget number 9. Something else that's interesting is with newer Mac mice, especially the model that Apple has called the Mighty Mouse that has a little scroll track ball on the top of it, it actually is a two-button mouse, although you can't physically distinguish between the two buttons because it's got a single plastic surface that covers the top of it. However, if you were to sort of mash down the plastic on the left side of the trackball, then it is a left click, and if you mash down the plastic on the right side, it's a right click. And interestingly, if you mash down the trackball itself, that does count as a middle button click. So Macs do understand multi-button mice. So I personally tend to go out and get myself a two-button mouse or just use the trackpad, which can also be configured on most Mac laptops to accept a right click instead of just left clicks. So, okay, that's the desktop. That's changing the background. Now, one of the things that appears on the desktop automatically are these icons for the built-in hard drives, any optical drives. So if you have a CD-ROM or a DVD-ROM and you have a disk inserted, that disk will appear on the desktop. And any external drives, either USB or FireWire. Icons for those will also appear normally. Now, if I right-click and I change my view options here, you can see that I can change the size of those icons, make them a little bigger, make them a little smaller, whatever I'm comfortable with. You can change the grid spacing. That's how far apart multiple icons would appear. You can change the text size, however you want to do things. Now, again, when we get to nugget number 9 and we start talking about system preferences, you can also change some of the things that Finder displays on the desktop by default. Now, so what's Finder? Finder is down here. It's the little Happy Mac face icon, and it's kind of like Windows Explorer. That program is always running any time that the Mac is on, at least if things are going well. If it's not running, then things aren't going well. But it is the one that goes out and decides what icons, your hard drives, your optical disks, and so forth. Now, something that I've had a couple of users sort of mess me up on. Let me go up to the Finder menu here, hit Preferences, and if we look here, it says Show these items on the desktop. I've had some kind of adventurous users go in and start unclicking these things, and as soon as you do that, they go away. That's great if the users want to have a clean desktop, and I know some people do, but when I sit down to help them out or something, it kind of throws me for a little bit of a loop because I'm like, okay, do you not have any hard drives? So just be aware that users can do that. And while we're talking about Finder, let's look at some of these other preferences. When we open a new Finder window, which I'll do in just a second, this controls where it goes by default. It defaults to the user's home directory. There's this thing called spring-loaded folders in Windows, which I'll show you in just a second. You can configure labels. And so I've decided here that a red label means it's work-related, and let's say orange means personal. So what you can do is any item, a file, a folder, or whatever else, you can apply a label to. So this says red is work-related, so when I click that, it labels my hard drive with a red label, and I can hit the X to turn that label off. So it's kind of a way to visually categorize things. Now in a Finder window, you've also got a sidebar. We'll see that in a second. This is how you determine what shows up in that sidebar. And then there are some advanced features. Show file name extensions, show a warning before you change an extension, show a warning before you empty the trash, and so forth. So let's open a new Finder window. There's three ways to do this really. One is to just double-click one of the icons that represents part of the file system, either a hard drive in this case or a CD. This is a new Finder window. As you can see, it's a lot like Windows Explorer. There's a folder hierarchy, and you can bop through here and take a look at all the different files and folders on your file system. This is called a column view. Another view is this list view. So in order to move back and forth here, you would just click on a different folder over here in the sidebar, and you can see that different folders are drop-downable using the little triangle arrows. And then you've got an icon view, which is real similar to what you might also see in Windows Explorer. Something that's kind of unique to the Mac, though, is cover flow view. So if I were to, let me just go back to my Applications folder and turn on cover flow. This is going to let me scroll through all the different stuff I've got and see them in this sort of iTunes music browsing like way. And if I go too quick, you can see it's going to take it a second to go fetch the icons, but if I scroll through, eventually it will go get them all. And you can double click, and what's neat is it shows you down here that same sort of hierarchical view. So if this gets to be a little bit much for you, you can go into there and you can see that the new icons will show up when I open that folder. So I said there were about three ways to open a new Finder window. That was one of them. The other way is to just double click the Finder icon down in the dock, and you can bring that up and that'll get you the same thing. Macs will typically remember what view mode you were in, and it will always default back to that. I'll switch it back to column view because that's the one I'm comfortable with. And the other way is to go up to the File menu and just select New Finder Window. You can also press Command N. Notice that little shortcut key there kind of looks like a little flower. You'll find that same icon on the Command key on a Mac keyboard. And so that's how you get Finder up and going. And once you're in there, it's really just like working with Windows Explorer. You can bop through folders, you can delete files, select files. I've actually added this little icon here for delete. Most of the smaller Mac keyboards don't have a delete button. So the way you would delete a file normally is to drag it to the trash. But I've added this little delete button, and the way you would do that is to just right-click the toolbar area and select Customize Toolbar. And then you can drag whatever these icons you want up to the toolbar so that they're always there, and you can change the default view that you've got and everything else. So you can really kind of make that look like you want it to. Just be aware, if you sit down at somebody else's computer to help them out, they may have completely rearranged that thing. So kind of be prepared to do things the manual way, maybe dragging them down to the trash. So that's Finder. Now, another element that you'll notice of the Mac here is this menu bar. And the menu bar for a Mac is always at the top of the window. It doesn't attach itself directly to individual applications. So if I open Safari, the built-in web browser, you can see that the menu bar changes to reflect the fact that I'm now using Safari. If I switch back to my Finder window, the menu bar changes. All menu bars always have this Apple menu, and this lets you get to certain global things. About this Mac will give you the software version, tell you what kind of processor you're running, how much memory you've got, and give you a shortcut to running the full system information thing called System Profiler. You can get to System Preferences, which is the Mac version of the control panel, do some things to control the dock, which we'll talk about in just a second, and log off, shut down, and so forth. Every application usually adds a first menu item that tells you what application this is, and this usually gets you an About This Application window, gets you to that application's preferences, and will provide some other options based on the application you're in. So if I switch to Safari, you can see that I get the ability to block up pop-up windows, get access to the private browsing feature, empty the cache, and so forth. When I switch back to Finder, I just get the things that apply to Finder. And then the rest of these menu options will change depending on what application you're in, but the menu bar is always at the top of the screen. Now, instead of a notification area and a taskbar, which is what Windows uses, the Mac puts all of its icons up at the menu bar. So I've got one for my wireless right here. Over here is the icon for my audio, my speakers. I can see my battery status. This gives me access to my display settings so I can change the resolution. I'm using the built-in iChat instant messaging software, so this icon shows me that I'm currently logged out. And this icon is for Spaces, which is something we'll talk about in just a sec. Now, Mac Windows, most Mac Windows will have these three different colored icons over here. The plus icon will tell the window to switch back and forth between its last configuration, its last size and shape, and sort of a fuller screen size and shape. So you can toggle back and forth between those. Minus will shrink it down to the right-hand area of the dock, and clicking on that will bring the window back. So that's kind of like minimizing it to the taskbar. And then the red X will close the window. In some applications, clicking the red X will actually close the application out entirely. In other applications, like Finder and Safari, hitting the red X will close the window, but it won't close the application. The application is still there and running in the background. And you would get to it through the dock, which is the next thing we'll talk about. So the dock sits at the bottom of the screen, and it's divided into two areas, the left half and the right half. And this little sort of dotted line is what separates them. Notice when I hover over that dotted line, I get this sort of resizing thing, and if I click while that's displayed and drag, I can resize the dock. So I can decide how big my icons are going to be. If I get over there and right-click, I can turn on a feature called magnification. Now, since my icons are fairly small, it might be tough for me to tell which icon I'm clicking on. So now, when I hover over the dock, it's going to automatically magnify the current where my cursor is, so I can see the icon I'm clicking on a little bit more easily. Some users like that. I kind of find it incredibly annoying. So I'm going to go back to the little resize, right-click, and turn magnification off. Now, you can position it in different locations on the screen. You can put it on the left, the right, or the bottom. If I move it over to the left, notice that it changes appearance a little bit. It's sort of like a little tray or toolbar now, rather than that 3D semi-translucent effect. So I'll right-click and position it back to the bottom. And the last thing you can do is turn on hiding, and this just makes it slide out of view so that you can get more screen space. And when you move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, it pops back in. So I'm going to turn hiding off. If you go right-click that again and hit Dock Preferences, you can configure a lot of those things manually, change the size, magnification, and when you access magnification this way, you can decide how big the icons get during magnification. And you can also control the minimize effect, and that's the visual effect that's used whenever you minimize something to and from the dock. So we'll just close that out. So the other neat thing on the dock is when an application is running, let me make the dock slightly larger here, you get a little blue glowing dot underneath the application. So this tells me that Safari is running even though I don't see any windows. When I click Safari, it'll pop up a new window. And the reason to leave an application running all the time is because it makes it faster to get a new window up when you want to. Safari is an application, a web browser that I use a lot, so I like to leave it running all the time. Some applications do close out completely, and you'll be able to tell because their little blue dot on the dock will go away. If you want to quit the application entirely, go to its application menu and just hit quit, or the Command Q shortcut. When I do that, the little blue dot goes away. Now, the dock is designed to contain icons for the applications you use the most frequently. Mail, address book, calendar, and so forth. If I go to my, didn't mean to move that. If I go to my computer's applications folder, I can drag any application I want to the dock. Let's say I work with the DVD player a lot, so I can just drag that down to the dock. It'll move everything over to make room for it. I can drop it there. And now I can easily get to the DVD player application. You'll notice that there's lots of applications available that don't appear in the dock. Well, so what happens if I run an application that's not in the dock, like TextEdit? I'll double-click that. it comes up and you can see that its icon has been added to the dock. If I quit it, that application is removed from the dock. So it's not one that's intended to be sticky because it's not one I use frequently. However, if I run the application, I decide, I keep having to dig into the applications folder to get to this stupid icon. Isn't there an easier way? Just right-click and say Keep in Dock. Now, if there are applications that you want to have open all the time, notice when I close that window that it left the icon there? I can right-click and say Quit, and that'll close the application for real. If there's icons or applications that you want to have up and running all the time, and you use them so frequently that you want to have them actually start as soon as you log in, you can right-click the icon and say Open at Login. And then after the Mac gets up and running, it'll automatically start all of those applications. If you decide that you're done using DVD player, for example, frequently, and you don't want it to permanently live on the dock and take up room all the time, you can either right-click it and say Remove from Dock, or just drag the dock icon to the trash can. And you're not deleting the app here. It makes it clear that you're removing it from the dock. Empty the trash, right-click it, and empty trash. It'll ask if I'm sure, and then delete it off for me. So that's the left half of the dock. The right half of the dock, in addition to containing minimized applications, also contains the trash can, and it contains two things called stacks. Now, these are here by default. You can really drag any folder you want to the right area of the dock, and it will become a stack. And a stack is simply a way of quickly seeing what documents live in that folder. So my Documents folder is something I get to a lot, and when I click that, rather than opening the folder, it just gets me quickly to the folders and the files that are in there. I can click this arrow icon to quickly open this up in Finder and browse it and work with the files and folders. This is just a quick way to getting to the contents of a folder that I use very, very frequently. So that's the left half of the dock and the right half of the dock. Talked about the desktop icons, the desktop, and the menu bar. So there's a couple of other features that you can get to within this sort of Finder application that are really useful. The first is called Spaces. Now we'll talk about how to configure this in nugget number 9, but right now I want to talk about how to use it. Spaces is the idea that you can have multiple different desktop areas, each with different applications. Now I've configured Spaces so that it puts an icon up here in the menu bar, and you can see that I'm in space number 1. I've configured Spaces on my computer to have 4 different spaces arranged in a grid, kind of like this icon back here suggests. So what I'm going to do is start by opening one application, Safari. And let's say that I work in Safari a lot. I always tend to have a lot of Safari windows open, and so I kind of want to avoid cluttering up my other work by leaving this in its own sort of space of itself. You can do this with any application you want to, really. I can choose a Finder window and have this up. So now I want to move to a different space. You can do this with keyboard shortcuts, or you can just click the menu bar icon if you've enabled it, and I'm going to move to space number 2. Space number 1 slides out of the way, and now I'm in space number 2. So let's open up, I don't know, let's just say remote desktop connection. That lives in space number 2. Now I can move to space number 3, which is diagonally down, and get a new fresh area to work in. Your desktop icons always stay the same between spaces. You'll notice I can always get to my Macintosh hard drive icon. Anything else that I drag out here. So let's go to my Documents menu. Notice that because a Finder window was already open, double-clicking the Macintosh hard drive to open a Finder window actually slid me back into space number 1. So I'll go to my Documents menu. I'm going to grab this file called the list, drag it out to the desktop. There it is. And now I'll switch to space number 2. And you can see that any icon that stays on the desktop is always available through all of your spaces. So let's switch back to space number 1. Drag this file back to my Documents folder, and I can close that window. So that's Spaces. There's another feature that's kind of easy to confuse for that called Expose. Let me show you how that works. I'm going to stay in one space this time. I'm going to open up a Safari window. I'll open up a remote desktop connection window, and I'm going to open up Microsoft Word for the Mac. That's going to take a couple of seconds to get up and running. When you are working in a single space, one thing that happens is it can get kind of cluttered. I've got a lot of windows, and because I have my display resolution set fairly small, it can get a little difficult to find all these things. I can certainly use the dock, but if I've got multiple Safari windows open, let's open another one and another one, then clicking on the application icon doesn't get me to a specific window. I would have to use the applications window to see that there's 3 different windows open. So the idea with Expose is to expose all of these things. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can configure Expose's use. You can set it so that certain corners of your screen are hot areas, and when you move the cursor there, Expose kicks in. You can also configure a keyboard shortcut, which is what I've done. And when I click that, all the windows that are currently active in this space sort of zoom out of the way, and they shrink down so I can see them all. And when I hover over, it tells me what the title of that is, Document 1, there's Word, and I can click on that, and it'll zoom everything back to full size with the one I clicked on top. So it's an easy way to navigate through all these different things. Spaces actually offers a similar feature. Let me switch to a different space. Load up a Finder window, switch over to Space 2, and over here, let's say I'm going to open up an Excel window. So there's Excel, and now I kind of want to do what's called a super expose. So I'm going to press my hotkey that I've assigned for this. And now I can see all 4 of my spaces and the applications that are running in them. And I can say, oh, okay, this is the space where I was running Finder. I'd lost track. So I'll click on that space, and that's the space I go to. So let me close some of these windows here. Now, I think the last feature we're going to really look at before we kind of move on to some other orientation stuff is called the dashboard. This, again, is something you can set a hotkey for, and it's designed to work a little bit like the sidebar in Windows Vista or the desktop applets in Windows 7. And the 2 ways to get to it are a hotkey that you can configure, usually one of the function keys, or the dashboard icon that's right on the dock. And when I click that, so the desktop fades into the background, and then I get all these widgets or gadgets or gizmos or whatever you want to call them. I've got a little note here with some meeting notes that I took earlier. I've got a calculator, and I can configure other gadgets and gizmos by clicking the big plus icon at the bottom. Now, clicking that allows me to delete any of the existing ones by clicking the X near them, or I can scroll down here and find different gizmos and gadgets. I can also click on Manage Widgets to go find more. There's tons of these things available for download at various places on the internet, including Apple's own website. So I can get a little weather thing, drag it to wherever I want it to be. It'll populate itself. This one appears to default to Cupertino, which is where Apple's headquarters is located. When I click X over here, management mode will go away. I'll be back in the regular mode of using these things. And notice when I move over this widget, the little I info appears. Clicking that will flip it over and allow me to configure it. So I happen to live in Las Vegas, so I'll just type a zip code for Las Vegas, hit done, and it flips back over and reconfigures itself. A lot of these widgets will have a backside, and that's where you can configure things like the paper color in this case. The calculator doesn't, so I can just use it as a calculator. And when you're done using Dashboard, just click anywhere on an empty area for the desktop, and you'll see the dashboard disappear and you're back to your regular desktop. So that's a really neat way to keep kind of commonly used tools available. And you'll get the same dashboard no matter which space you're in. So it's a common thing that floats across all of them. In this nugget, we sort of did a basic orientation for Mac OS X. We talked about the desktop, and we talked about Finder, the application that you'll use to manage files and folders on your Mac. We talked about the dock, which is where icons live for applications you get to frequently, as well as all the applications that are currently running. And it's a place where your trash can lives and where you can put stacks for folders that you access frequently. We talked about the global menu bar, and we talked about 3 special features that allow you to kind of manage your workspace. Spaces, which gives you multiple desktop areas to work on. Expose, which helps you find windows in a cluttered environment, and Dashboard, which gives you access to a sort of behind-the-scenes collection of useful gadgets and gizmos. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for